Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to be chatting a little bit about the realities of making permanent change and what that actually means.
Yeah. I think you all probably know us pretty well for just telling it like it is, being patient with the journey. But we also talk a lot about, I think, fat loss and like getting to the destination of like what's our dream body, dream physique, whatever you want to call it. But I think the really important thing that I just felt like, I think I can't remember which one of us came up with this topic. It was just like we are just powwowing on like clients and stuff. But I really feel like this topic is just underemphasized in terms of like when you've gotten healthy, when you have gotten to the goal, you've lost the weight. This is the piece that everyone's missing is there's a series of like mental shifts as well as tactical shifts that need to happen for you to actually keep the weight off. And I think beyond just like ditching the diet mentality of like, I'll do this thing and then I'll be done. But like, what does it actually look like to keep weight off forever? And I think there's like really, at least in my life, and even Aaron's been noticing some of these things as well because he's lost like 60 pounds now. Um, we've been noticing just these little things that like we don't really think about anymore, or that we kind of take for granted, or that we just do not automatically, but it's a habit that people don't talk about because it's like it's almost too ingrained in us at this point, a decade in to being in this journey. So I'm excited to share those with you.
Yeah, and I think that there are a couple different lenses to kind of look at this through because I feel like a lot of times, and we've talked about this before, a lot of times people can lose weight. The issue that they have is keeping it off.
Hmm.
And I think that there are a couple different reasons. And so, number one, it's because they went about weight loss the quote unquote wrong way, right? Like they did something super extreme, they did super low calories, they did keto or whatever that is, and they're not able to keep up those lifestyle changes or whatever to be able to keep the weight off because
Yeah.
it's not sustainable, and so they'll go back to where they were before, or if not worse. The other kind of issue, and this is I feel like what we're going to be talking about today, is like, okay, I did go about this in the quote unquote right way, like I lost the weight, but now what? Like, how do I now maintain this? So I think that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. Well, and too, like the another scenario where we don't, keep the weight off is when you lose it and then like life changes. You get a new job, you move, you
Mm-hmm.
have a kid, you get married, get a divorce, whatever it is, and it's like, how do I do this now?
Yeah.
And so it's like if we don't have these ingrained kind of not just habits, but like ways of troubleshooting and thinking about how do we integrate this into our life, like the actual skills of problem solving in this arena, then we're kind of lost there, right? And then we need help again. And there's nothing wrong with needing help again. I think one of my favorite things, honestly, is like I've welcomed back a good handful of clients that I worked with years ago recently. And I think a big piece of that is like just the acceptance that, like, it's not that we didn't quote unquote fulfill the promise last time. It's the fact that it's a new season of life. We don't need to expect ourselves to just figure it out just with the wave of a wand. Like it's new. We need those tools, those skills. But then at a certain point, you should have gone through enough seasons of life, enough changes, enough things with the experience of figuring it out to know, like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it forever. And it looks different. So we'll kind of give you guys those examples so that you can know, like, what are the little things that we need to be doing to make this really, really stick.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like you were saying, to recognize that there are going to be seasons of life. So what you're doing now to maintain that weight loss might change.
Yeah.
And it's flexible, right? So there are going to be times where you can be a little bit more adherent. There are going to be times where you need to back off. So it's not like you just get to this spot and you just wake up and do the exact same thing
Yeah.
every single day. But I think that the important thing and like the overarching theme is like Permanent change means permanent change, right? So yes, you do have to kind of keep doing all this. Because I have had a few clients where they get a little bit discouraged because they're like, I'm doing all this stuff, I'm tracking my macros, I'm doing all this, and I've kind of like, I'm frustrated because I feel like I have to be incredibly adherent, and then I get discouraged because I feel like I've got to continue to do this the rest of my life, and they're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
um, and so that's kind of a hard reality for them. And so one of the things that we kind of talk about is like, yeah, we do have to kind of continue our healthy habits, right? Like that's like the foundation of, being leading a healthy and fit lifestyle. But generally, the journey to reach the goal is going to be a little bit more like, yes, you're going to have to be a little bit more adherent. You're going to have to kind of put in that effort, but what you need to do to maintain that is usually not as strict. So I feel like that's a way to encourage clients to keep going and be like, hey, once we kind of reach this destination, we can kind of take our foot off the gas and it'll be a little bit easier. But then I've had other clients who are like, that's the part that I'm worried about. I'm
Yeah.
worried about that maintenance aspect. So, but yeah, that's kind of like, I feel like that's kind of the first mindset shift that we have to kind of make while we're in our journey is, yes, we do have to keep doing all this, but to varying degrees. So it will look different.
Yeah, and I think actually a good story that had literally happened the other day that might encapsulate like the mindset of this permanent change concept. How do we make it last forever? Is actually I'll tell a story about Aaron. So I just mentioned he's lost about 60 pounds in the last 2 years, but
Which
he's
is
definitely gotten
freaking incredible.
yeah, yeah. But he's definitely gotten down to like his leanest, like under 210. He's 6'3". He's pretty lean right now, and he's getting into running long distance. So that's a big part of the reason why too. But basically, he's basically just gone down one or two sizes in everything. And so the other day he walked out of the bedroom. He was all dressed, ready to leave the house, go somewhere. I forget what we were doing, but he was just like, dude, losing weight sucks in some ways. I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, everything that you spent so much money on to feel good in when you didn't feel good in your body doesn't fit
Mm,
anymore. Like, and now you got to buy a whole new wardrobe. And it's like first world problems, right? We understand that.
yeah.
But it's like, because I wasn't comfortable in my body, I invested more money and time and energy into finding the clothes that like felt good in that body. But now it's totally different. And now like anything fits me better because I just have like a body that is kind of like more fit for the sizing or whatever.
Yeah.
And so he was like, it's just kind of like a tough reality to face because like, yeah, I'm looking at my closet, I'm like, dang, I spent so much money on this stuff that I really liked and now it's like way too big. um, and so the lesson from that I pulled for today is that there's just downsides to everything. Like, I think we
Mm-hmm.
think of losing weight as this utopia that like everything's good from now on. What does that do? Like, it creates expectations that like all the bad goes away when we reach the goal. And then those expectations, if they are not met once we reach the goal, then we often face this like, oh, well, what was the point of even reaching this goal anyways? That's where like self sabotage can come in. That's where just kind of like letting completely loose on the reins and gaining the weight back because of that what's the point mentality comes in. And so I think something to just go in with your eyes wide open on is like there's things that suck either way, and you just have to do a full pros and cons analysis. Sometimes you don't know what those downsides on the other side of the coin are. But like really just asking yourself, is it worth it to me to have to buy this new wardrobe if I do feel confident in my body? I can take my shirt off at the pool. I'm just using Aaron's example. Like, I can take my shirt off at the pool. I can feel just mobile and healthy and energized all the time. Hi, Colton. We have a visitor. But yeah, it's like you have to pick the pros and cons that are worth it to you. But I think most of us are just blindsided by the cons of the other side because we just think like, once I lose the weight, my whole life is just going to be so much better. Which it is. And being healthy is so much better than feeling unhealthy and feeling unconfident in your skin. However, that doesn't mean that it's utopia. So that was kind of the lesson I pulled from that.
Yeah, I actually have a client who she had pulled out a bunch of pre-pregnancy clothes from like 4 years ago. And she was super excited because she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have this new wardrobe," and nothing fit her anymore. Actually, it was all too big.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and she had to donate a lot of the clothes, but it's like one of those like, oh well, that must be nice, but then she's got to get new clothing. So she's actually doing a subscription clothing, like the
Yeah.
box where they send you, because she was like, I don't want to have to buy a new wardrobe for this like in between body,
Yeah.
but now yeah. So she's like, but now I have to buy clothes for when I get to my dream body. Yeah. So she's in this like, I don't. Yes, I gave Colton a mohawk, so we're learning. Yes, your hair. So if I don't have one child with me, it's another one. But it made me think about pregnancy and postpartum because that is such an extreme version of yourself. And so I did the same thing. I'm like, I don't really want to buy maternity clothing because I don't want to have clothing that I really only need for 3 4 months out of for
Yeah.
whatever. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, but now I want a third. So I probably should have invested, but then there are different seasons, so it's like all
Yeah.
this stuff. And then it's like postpartum and like you're it's super awkward because like nothing fits you, but you're not pregnant anymore. So you can't wear what you did. I don't know. It's just like really weird. So I relate to that because it's like, I
Yeah.
don't want to invest in all this clothing and then only need to like donate or I wear it a couple times and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, just the moral of the story there's downsides to everything. And I think just going in with your eyes wide open of like, it's still going to be better net positive. But, when we ask ourselves, like, okay, is continuing to do all this stuff really worth it to me? I think you have to do that pros and cons analysis for yourself. I would say that 99.9% of people are going to end up saying, yes, it's worth it to get healthy. It's worth it to have my energy. It's worth it to feel good in my skin. But, going through that process, making that decision for yourself can make your journey just stick better. So that's like one reality of permanent change, I guess, is like the mindset shift of accepting the pros and cons of the dream body and really coming to terms with what that means and how that looks. And then from there, I think it's like figuring out one thing I think is a really important term, an all encompassing term for a permanent lifestyle change is non negotiables. From there, figuring out what are kind of those bare bones that keep you where you are, because there's going to be seasons of ebb and flow of fitness is more of a priority versus less, or just you're taking or spending more time, mental bandwidth, headspace on it than not. Because like for myself right now, I feel like I'm still in the season of my life that I would qualify as like honestly like 18 to 27, to where like fitness is definitely at the very, very much forefront. I have active goals that I'm pursuing. It's competitive. It's for like a sport of some kind. Like I'm pursuing CrossFit, right? And actively pursuing body composition goals with like deficits. Like I'm doing a mini cut right now, maintenance phases, like all these things. I'm being very, very active in that. And there are non-negotiables for that for sure. And I think that's the type of fitness that you see online. It's like, I'm going into a calorie deficit. I'm reverse dieting. I'm training for a competition. Like that's what you see on social media. But there's also seasons that I know will be coming up in my life in the future that are like, I just do the non-negotiables to support my work, my family, myself in those areas. And so I think that that's where those things really come in handy because most people are not doing the like active pursuit of like really big fitness goal at the forefront of my life sort of thing. Most of us just have a family, have a job, really want to just feel good in their day to day and need those non negotiables to stay that way. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how, like, again, some of the clients are like, wait, I have to like keep going on walks. Like, I have to keep doing this stuff. And it's kind of like, yeah, but I think it's again finding those non negotiables and just kind of like, what is yeah, like the bare minimum of what's going to kind of maintain this. And I think we were kind of talking about this a little bit too, with like the pros and cons. And I don't know, pros and cons, but like if you are more active, right? If you're getting in more steps, if you're going to the gym, you're working out more, you're more diligent with your fitness, you're probably going to maintain like a leaner physique, and that's just the reality, right? But
Yeah.
if you are like, hey, I really don't want to have to do a whole heck of a lot every single day, it's like, okay, well then, you know, you're going to have a little bit of a trade off. So then you might maintain a higher body fat percentage than you're comfortable with, but that's kind of the trade off with what you're kind of willing to do.
Yeah.
But again, all this to say, because we've talked about this before, like the longer that you have been in the your fitness journey, and like the higher amount of muscle mass you have, typically you don't have to do as much,
Yeah.
and you can kind of get away with a little bit more with what you need to do to maintain. So
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
what I like to kind of think about. So Marissa and I were actually just talking about this off air with like, you know, what are some of my goals? And I was like, you know, with being postpartum, and you know, I've kind of thrown around the idea of competing again, but I was telling Marissa, but you know, I do think we think I want to get pregnant again, which is literally wild to be talking about that, you know, 4 weeks postpartum. But one of the things I was talking about is, well, you know, not really having a whole lot of time before we have to do that again. And do I want to put in the level that I would need to prep? Am I willing to do that? And I would be able to maintain obviously a much leaner physique, but I don't know if I'm willing to put in that much time and effort to be able to do that. So kind of talking about, I'd rather maintain a higher body fat percentage, something that I'm comfortable with, but be able to live life and not feel like fitness is the very forefront. So kind of just making those decisions with yourself, and kind of thinking about what is the reality. But I kind of like to think about, okay, like what are my non-negotiables with like steps? What are my non-negotiables with nutrition? Like what are my non-negotiables with mindset, and kind of coming up with those different areas. And so for me, it's like, okay, I want to maintain a minimum 5,000 steps. And of course, this is very different with where I currently am postpartum, but generally speaking, minimum 5,000. You know, I want to go outside at least once during the day, which is, it's hard because like we spend a lot of time inside sitting at our computer. And so I like to go on daily walks, and that's just, again, something that I like to do with my children. And then when it comes to nutrition, it's like, okay, like minimum like 100 grams of protein.
Yeah.
And if I do those things, and same thing with water. I feel like that's just kind of ingrained and something I don't even really need to like think about.
Yeah.
But I would say at least 80 ounces of water a day. And those are kind of like my non-negotiable type things. Um, and thinking about, and this is another thing that I've talked with the clients about, it's like, what do you feel like is something that's not super hard to do, right? Like if you set your non-negotiable at 20,000 steps, like that's going to be really tough to do
Yeah.
every single day. But it's kind of like, what are the things that are going to make you feel good about your day, despite like if you had a crazy day at work, a crazy day with family, whatever. It's kind of like, hey, I at least did these things, so I feel really good about what I did for that day, and it wasn't something that was really difficult for me to have to do.
Yeah. Definitely. So while you were saying all that, like laying out all the non-negotiables, I actually like I think I was able to draw this out. I think I was able to make this into a graph. So picture an X and a Y axis. I just drew this. I think it works. So X and Y axis, the X axis, hold on. Oh my God, it's been so long. Yeah, X axis is the bottom, is time, right? It's typically, that's how that works. The bottom is typically time. Um, the amount of time that's passed, and then the y-axis is the amount of like essentially like active effort that you put into
Hmm.
something. So whether that's activity level, workouts in the gym, steps,
Meal
cognizance of
prep.
nutrition, tracking, yeah.
Yeah.
The basically the curve is fairly linear, I would say, in terms of if the graph title is how easy or difficult it is to maintain your ideal body weight. I think, like what you said, the more time that goes by with just the years under your belt of building muscle, doing these things, the less effort and activity that it's going to take for you to maintain your ideal body weight. But if you have no time under your belt doing it the right way, then it's probably going to take a little bit more effort to actually realize the weight maintenance that you need. So I'm still like getting this curve right, this whole graph right, but I'm thinking, yeah, like it is a pretty linear relationship as a whole. So you could either, be a veteran of all this. Like what I'll say is, for me, just had a competition last Saturday that I competed in, and this past week I think I worked out like 2.5 times, if you want to call it that. Really easy, like just took it super light. I was like, I am beat up, I'm tired. And for me, like my physique actually improved across the week. I dropped bloat, inflammation. Like a lot of people would freak out over maybe not working out for a week, but I was like, dude, I just sat on the bike for 20 minutes one day. Like that was my half essentially. Anytime I made it to the gym, I was like going through the motions, not challenging myself. Like it was just like a drudgery. But for me, that was like a really, really slow week. But it wasn't anything that made my progress worse. Even if I took 2 weeks off, I'd still be fine. And I think that's because I've been doing this for 10 years. But if I were to be, if this were 2016, then yeah, I'd probably slow down my progress if I stopped working out for a couple weeks or a month or something like that.
This kind of like made me think about currently what we're seeing in the fitness space right now. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen this like hybrid athlete, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, ooh, running is cool again.
It
Right. We
is.
got like our Viper glasses and like, all of we're going on beating our
Strava,
time.
yeah.
Yeah. And what I really like is Nick Bear. And so I would say he is like the pinnacle of like a hybrid athlete, right? Where he's super strong. He has all this muscle, but he's also doing marathons, right? But a lot of, and I feel like he does make this disclaimer quite a bit where he was like, I wouldn't be able to maintain all this muscle if I just started running and training as a hybrid athlete.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's something where you see a lot of like influencers in the fitness space where they're like, oh, now I'm transitioning doing Pilates and I'm doing these bar like EMOM workouts or in doing all this, and they maintain a very muscular physique, but trying to think about that that's not what got them the physique that they have now, but it's they're in that maintenance phase where maybe they're not trying to really grow a lot of muscle. So if you're just starting out and you want a lot of muscle, you're going to have to spend a lot more time in the gym.
Yeah.
You're not really, so that's just something that I was thinking about when we're talking about the time and the effort and maintenance,
Yeah.
that your workouts can kind of change as you progress and
Yeah, I mean,
put
honestly,
on more
not even if
muscle.
you want a lot of muscle, like if you just want a healthy metabolism,
Yeah.
like you're gonna have to lift weights and
Yeah.
do a lot of that to start. And
Yeah.
then you can always work in those fun classes and running and things like that because obviously more activity is better than nothing.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but yeah, if you want to really have a long-term healthy metabolism, you got to build that base of muscle mass. And that takes time. It takes years to build. Just honestly, just the honest work, the day in, day out. And that's why we say like it's a lifestyle, and the lifestyle, like to not be mistaken, is those non-negotiables. Is I'm getting my steps in. I'm going and lifting weights in whatever capacity that means for the season of my life. If it's 2 dumbbells at home, if it's at the gym, if it's an apartment gym, whatever it is, and eating high protein, nutrient dense, managing my calories, drinking lots of water, getting plenty of sleep, are those are the non-negotiables, right? That keep your habits at bay. And I do believe, I was even thinking about saying this, and then I even thought about it and just held my tongue. I was gonna say, barring any like big hormonal conditions, your body is a reflection of the habits that you live by on a day-to-day basis. But I almost like the reason I paused myself there, I was like, but wait, what's the root cause of hormonal conditions? Typically, like a lot of chronic dieting, like poor lifestyle habits and choices, lack of stress management are often, along with a genetic predisposition, what create these hormonal conditions. And so I'll say just generally, like your body fat levels, the set point that you kind of that you live at is a reflection of the lifestyle that you live and like where you fall on that curve. So like for myself, if I'm in that, and I've had plenty of these seasons where I was like, I'm just doing the bare minimum to like make sure I can stay healthy, have energy for work. Like work is the priority right now, and I just cut my gym time back. I'm spending as much time as I can, just focusing on one thing, and uh, and those seasons I'm probably weighing about 150 ish or so, and just a little bit thicker set, like nothing crazy, still healthy, all that, and maybe going to the gym 3 times a week, 5,000 steps a day. But in this season of my life, I'm like low 140s. I go to the gym 5, 6 days a week. I'm getting 8 to 10,000 steps per day. And so that's like what I mean is like those are the habits I'm living by. That's like where my body's set point kind of falls. And everybody's got their own unique kind of set of levels there of like you have a choice in that. You can pick like where do you kind of fall there, and then of course, barring hormonal conditions, there's maybe more complex ways of going about it, but still like you can manage and navigate through finding out what that balance is going to look like for you. And I think the real secret to permanent success is just figuring out like which trade-offs are worth it for you in that season. um,
Yeah, and I think the fun kind of part about it is like you can turn it up and you can turn it down based on where you're at and where your priorities are. And we've talked about this before. It's like, hey, if we're moving and we've got this going on and like family needs to be the priority right now, like maybe we do take a step back and that's
yeah.
okay. And it's not, hey, we're doing absolutely nothing. I no longer have these non-negotiables. It's no, it's like we just need to figure out what's realistic at the time. But um, if you want health and fitness to be a top priority, like you can do that and you can turn it on because you have that foundation of health and fitness. And so okay, here are my non-negotiables. I just need to turn them up a little bit and have
Yeah.
them be a bigger priority. So I think that that's kind of like the fun aspect of things, because it's not like, oh, what new diet do I need to try to get back to this? It's just like, hey, let's just dial it up a little bit.
Yeah. I think the big thing with that is like, yeah, just it's the amount of like kind of control you're taking over your schedule. And I think it's really important for people to learn this, regardless of what phase or season of life that they're in, to learn how to run their schedule rather than have their schedule run them as much as possible, right? Because like I don't get, but I understand how maybe having an infant runs your schedule a bit, right? But
Yeah,
like,
a little bit.
how do you and your husband communicate for shifts and trade offs and like the fact that you were able to make this podcast work on a weekend because your husband's home, right? So it's like you're running your schedule in that way, even though there's things that you can't control about it. I think most people lack that skill set, and they need to learn that in order to have that ability to say I can turn it up, I can turn it down. Otherwise it's just kind of always chaos and we don't have any control, right? So I think that's a really important piece of permanent change is like is the empowerment of like understanding you can have varying levels of control over your schedule, but you do have a choice and a say in that. And you can always be an active participant in that versus kind of just letting your life run you. And I think it's really, really empowering when you have those conversations, say with the significant other, or you put down a boundary at work, or you
Mm,
just change things in your life and realize that it actually made the difference that you hoped, and then you're like, oh, now I have 30 minutes to do this, an hour to do that. I think that's really cool, and I think more people need to learn that to make permanent change.
yeah, yeah, I love that. And it's kind of like, okay, a lot of times you're like, oh, I don't have time. It's like, okay, let's audit and let's see what that actually looks like and go from there. Do you really not have time? or are there some things that we can change, or hey, do we need to like get off our phones for 30 minutes and like
Yeah.
actually we can do this, or oh actually we can go to bed a little bit earlier, or hey, if we're gonna watch TV at the end of the night, well, let's just throw some blue blocker glasses on. Just like
Yeah.
little things here and there that you can do that will help. But um, I love the other thing too. We talk about if you can't do it for a decade, don't do it for a day. We have that written on our outline, and so I think it's like where I'm thinking about like contest prep, right? Like I can't do 2 hours of cardio. I can't do, poverty macros. I can't do all of these things for a decade. But just recognizing that there are phases and we can turn it up and we can turn it down. But I think it's like with keto or with, some other kind of crazy diet. It's like, I don't really know if you can like turn keto off or on. Like a lot of fad
No,
diets, it's
it
like,
is it is all or nothing.
right, it's all or nothing. It's like you have this rigid set of rules. And I wouldn't necessarily consider that a phase because it's not something that you can turn on or off. Whereas with like you have these non-negotiables, like those are, yeah, we have our non-negotiables, but we can adjust them a little bit
Yeah.
and it's not rigid. And that sometimes can be very difficult for some people because they do like that black or white. And we've talked about this a ton because we are typically those type of people, especially that's one of the reasons why we like contest prep. That's one of the reasons we like 75 hard, like for personal reasons. But thinking about that whenever you're about to start something, kind of having that like question and asking yourself and thinking about like, what would this look like in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? Would I still be able to do this?
Yeah, definitely. Because the rule is stay in ketosis. Like if you're doing like true keto, like that is the rule, and that means certain things just are forever gone, and that's something that very few people I think could like realistically accept. And I think with that, it's okay. So it's not the black or white rules; it's the habits, it's the things that we've discussed. Like it's literally nothing more than the things we've discussed. And like I know that everybody's peddling their secret, but everyone that is doing the good work in this industry is just making a new name for all of the things that we just said, all the non-negotiable principles. But I think another piece of making sure that you can do it for the decade is how you are making it easier in your life. And so something that I've become really passionate about is engineering your environment. I think we've both done this in one way or another, to make these habits easier for us, because it's, we always talk about investing time, investing energy in ourselves. But there's a lot of things that like there's costs to everything. So like if you are a busy mom of 3 or 4 kids and you have to commute 20 minutes to the gym there and back, it's like, okay, there's it might cost a lot to build out some sort of a home gym, but like that's an investment that gets you back hours upon hours of your time when you can just walk into the garage and do a quick 30-minute workout and not have to worry about 40 minutes in the car and facing traffic, right? So it's like in your life, and especially like per season and just in general, like how are you engineering your environment to work for you rather than against you? Because if I were that mom of 4 kids and I had to drive 20 minutes to and from the gym, I don't think I would get to the gym very often. And then it's like, well, then what really is realistic, right? You have to figure out, how can I engineer my environment in that way, with like a walking pad, being able to get your steps in during work. Maybe you're just a very career focused person and spending a ton of time walking outside just doesn't jive with your schedule and your life. Okay, cool. Knock it out while you're working then, and just do it on the walking pad. And stuff in the kitchen too. Like the Ninja Creamy is a great example. I think the reason that it went viral is because it made having a sweet tooth okay. Like it's like you can have a whole pint of ice cream for 50 grams of protein, basically, and really not have it deter from your goals. And it's like, okay, well, if your constant excuse is, well, I have a sweet tooth and I just love sugar and I just have so many cravings, it's like, well, that just took that off the table, right? Or an air fryer. I hate meal prep. I hate reheated leftovers. They get soggy. It's like, cool, use the air fryer. They get crisp now. That solves so many people's problems with when it comes to leftovers. So I think all these different ways that you can invest into your environment, and we have a whole episode on that, I think, like things you can buy, things you can invest in that aren't coaching or something like that. But I think it's so important because that's something that you can keep forever. Like you can keep an appliance forever, you can keep a treadmill, a home gym forever, and it does make it a lifestyle for you because now it just makes it that much harder to do the alternative.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about is not just engineering your environment, but then also again the mindset shift that we have to make as well along our journey. And so yeah, just coming to that conclusion of yes, I do have to do this forever to
Yeah.
varying degrees, but then also like the identity shift that you need to go through as well. And that's really important because that doesn't happen with a 3 month coaching package, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't become a new person. You might create a really strong foundation, but if you don't make that shift of this is who I am now, and that's going to be very difficult to have a healthy and fit lifestyle like down the road, because it's kind of like making that shift of like this is a priority for me, this isn't just a phase, this isn't just this, like this is who I am now. And we've talked about this before previously, like when we started our journeys, like we started carrying, like we were super bro, like we carried our gallon jugs with us, right? Like we started going to the gym, and your parents or your family are kind of like, well, what is this a phase? And you're like, this isn't just a phase.
It's a
It's
lifestyle,
a
bro.
lifestyle, like yeah. And like so like we carry, now we're mature and we carry Stanleys with us, right? We don't carry a gallon jug, but it's like we have that. We like eat every, like few hours, or when we go out to eat, like sometimes we make some adjustments to our food and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's just Marissa, or that's just Christina, like because they like that's the shift that we've made, and like they've just kind of like accepted that, but we also had to make that shift as well. And kind of just thinking from like it's not that I'm like a person who is implementing, or I'm in this like fitness program, or I'm in this phase. It's like no, like I am a fit and healthy person. And we've talked about this.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean that you need to create like an Instagram account, start documenting everything, or put fit at the end of your handle or whatever. You can, and that's what we did right
Yeah.
when we first started. But like that's not necessarily what it means, that you have to dedicate your entire life to health and fitness. But just kind of having that identity shift, I think, is really really important, and it looks different, and that timeline is different for everyone.
Yeah. And I think where you really realize that you've changed is, and I think this is why, like, we're so adamant about when we have clients that work with us, we want to work with them for the long haul. We want to work with them for 6, 8, 12 months, longer even. I mean, a lot of our clients, they work with us for multiple years. And I think the reason why that is really important, like if that is an investment that you can make in yourself, it's so worth it because I think when you realize you've changed is when you go through some shit and you're still like proving to yourself like, no, this is what I'm like. And you basically have that moment. Maybe it's one moment, maybe it's a collection of moments, but it's like moments where it's like shit's hitting the fan. You have a choice to go back to the way things once were, to go back to those habits and to kind of throw in the towel or just make those concessions. Or you are like, no, these are the standards that I live by. So I'm going to stick with them somehow, maybe in varying degrees. Maybe I'm flexible on the how or the how much, but I'm strict on the fact that it gets done. And that's like the turning point, I think, for a lot of people. Somebody that did this really well, I'm not going to name her, but if she listens to this, she'll probably know who she is. She's lost, I think, over 110 pounds with us, and just an absolute warrior on all fronts. And her journey is really inspiring when you know the whole story. But she had someone very, very close to her pass away that she was seeing after she had lost, I think, the last like 40 pounds to get to her goal weight. And I'll be honest, I heard the news and I immediately got worried because I was like, this is a turning point. Like this is where like the permanence either happens or it doesn't. Like, and that was what the thought that went through my mind. And like not even weeks after the news, like she was continuing to just plug away. And I asked her later, after things had passed, I was like, wanted things to settle, and I was like, so, what was it for you, right? Like, what were you thinking at that time that like kept you going with all of this? And she was just like, this is who I am now. And like I had to reframe it in those situations of stress that like I have a choice, and that person, they would want me to keep going. Right. And so I think she's changed everything about herself to the point where like even just the way she viewed the situation motivated her to keep going. And I think that that's so powerful when it comes to a permanent change, a permanent identity shift. I think you got to go through some shit and like really see what you're made of. And then when you kind of prove to yourself like, no, this is who I am now, like that's when it like really sets in. So
Yeah, I have a lot of different instances with clients, and I've thought about this with myself too. I think that it's also kind of that realization where it's like, oh, wow, this doesn't feel as hard anymore. Like
yeah.
when you kind of just have this realization, like, oh, I just like subconsciously like was just like meal prepping, or I was like planning out my meals on Sunday, or I was just getting ready for a walk, and everything just felt automatic. And that's not to say that some days, like you're gonna be like, we talked about this. I gotta go on
Yeah,
a
you always got to pull yourself
stupid,
up by your
stupid
bootstraps.
walk for my stupid mental health. Right? Like we still have that. Like sometimes it's still a fight for me. Like in the summer, I'm like, oh god, it's so hot. Like I don't want to go outside on my walk, but I'm like, I gotta do it. Um, but when things become automatic, or when they have this realization where like kids are sick, or they had an emergency, or kind of what you were just talking about, something happened in your life, and then you had this like, well, I could just do what I did previously, and I could revert back to my old habits, or I can continue with my new habits. Granted, again, we're going to scale back a little bit, right? Like we're not going to be at this like I'm going all in, but just again going back to our non-negotiables. And I think that when clients do this despite what they have going on, and then they realize, wow, I feel so much better during this time, and I was actually
Yeah.
more equipped to handle the stress or the situation because of how I felt physically and how I felt mentally. And I think that's when they kind of realize like, wow, like this is not just for me looking better. This is actually going to help improve all areas of my life. So when they have, or or we've seen this quite a bit of times, where maybe they'll go out to a restaurant, or they'll go and party or whatever, and they're like, I feel awful.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh god, I can't believe I used to do this all the time. And so
Yeah.
they kind of have this like, I don't want to go back to that. And I think
Yeah.
when you have either one or a combination, or you've experienced all three of these things, it's like, no, this really is my new lifestyle. And I think
Yeah.
that's like, wow, this is kind of cool. Like this is who I
Yeah.
am now. This is my lifestyle. This is my life.
Yeah. And there's continual reinforcements. And I think one thing
Mm-hmm.
that like really puts a nail in the coffin for me is the fact that when it comes to making a permanent change, it's like you don't realize those things unless you're like actively practicing self-awareness. You're actively practicing all these things and working on your mindset, and like just honestly never saying like, okay, this is enough, I'm just going to stop here. Like just continuing to try to grow. And I think recognizing that permanent success means that it's an active practice. I used to use the word automatic a lot. I used to use it a lot. I used to use it with clients, and I would say like, it's just going to feel automatic eventually. And I just lacked an understanding of what I was really implying by that. And I think it maybe did some harm when it comes to expectation setting of like, it's never going to be truly automatic. It's going to be a lot easier. You're going to have days and times where things feel like they're flowing and you're not even thinking about it. Absolutely. It's just a part of life, like we said. But it's an active practice. It's the fact that I'm practicing the habit the day before I'm planning my day the next day. Each week, I'm planning out my week. I'm actively reflecting with myself and trying to better my mindset, better my habits on a day by day basis. And we don't stop. However, it's just much easier because we've been doing it for so long. And so I like to really lean more on just habits, making it a habit versus it's automatic now for that reason. But because it is just such an active practice, like faith, like meditation, like anything that that really does change you for the better. I think it's something you have to kind of think about and work on every day.
Yeah, it's not like automatic in the sense that like you're a robot and you find yourself just like
Beep
not
boop.
having, yeah, beep boop boop, and you're like on your walk and beep boop boop, you're meal prepping, like, right? You're still gonna have some days where you're like, oh, I don't want to do this, or and you have to fight those battles, but things are just going to feel easier. Or like again, we've talked about this example with like our steps, like we have walking pads, and that makes it easier on days where we don't get out for a outside walk, or but we still have to ugh, I can't be lazy, I need to do this, like, so yeah, I think that's a really good disclaimer that we're not robots, but we've done some things that make it easier, and we've done it for so long that it does feel kind of just like, okay, cool, I know I can ground some turkey and I can grill some chicken, and that's going to help me during the week, and I don't necessarily really need to think about it. But
Yeah,
I think we've touched on everything that we wanted to talk about today. Is that right?
that's all I got.
Yeah. So hopefully this gives you some encouragement that if you're either starting or in the middle of your journey, or even at the end, or I don't know if there is really an end, right? Like it's something we're going
If
to
you're a
continue.
veteran.
Yeah, more of a veteran, but hopefully this gives you some encouragement that this can become a lifestyle. But whether, and this is another aspect of things too. Like if you have been really fit previously and maybe you've like slid back or regressed in some way too, because I know that that's can be really difficult. I have a lot of people who are like, I used to be really fit, or I used to be XYZ. That can be really difficult too, because they feel like I should be able to get back to this place, and they're having a difficult time. That it's not just, again, this end goal and we reach it and that's where we're at forever. That there are different phases, and there can be some setbacks, but that there's no like, I don't know, you always have the ability to continue to move forward and make improvements.
Yeah. Okay, there's one more thing.
Okay.
Uh, I would say because that what you just said, like if you've been fit before and you've slid back, or you got to a certain place, you kind of let it go and you had to like diet down again. And because I think there's a misconception that that doesn't happen once you reach your goal weight. But I will be totally transparent with you all that like over these past 10 years I have fluctuated. And I think the sign of lasting success is that, and I was thinking about this, I'm trying to like also conceptualize this in a way that like makes sense to a lot of people, is like when we yo-yo diet and we are total chaos, what happens? We have 10 pounds to lose when we're what? 13 years old, maybe 18 years old, 22 years old, early 20s, teens. That's when a lot of us start dieting. And then we lose 10, gain 20, lose 20, gain 40. And we lose and gain more back. And the gap between your ideal and where you end up is larger and larger and larger. I think the sign of permanent success is that your, I don't even like using this word, but like that your relapses, quote unquote, are smaller and smaller and smaller. And so over the years, I used to fluctuate a lot. And now, over the past probably 5 years, my fluctuations have stayed within a range of like 7 pounds. But I still have seasons where I feel like I've just been too lenient with myself. I want to tighten things up. Like I mentioned earlier in this episode, I'm doing a mini cut, but this mini cut, I'm starting at the lightest and leanest that I ever have been. I'm only tightening up like maybe 5 pounds. It's not even about that. It's about like the disciplines and the standards that I'm holding myself to, and just feeling a little bit lighter and like more light on my feet. But that's like an example, is like that gap keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I will say you'll probably have seasons where you kind of let things slide a little bit farther than you'd like. And I think a big sign of permanent change is like, stop considering that a failure and look at that in the big picture, right? And then reel yourself back in and know that the next time you're going to have, you're going to have all the habits in place for that much longer, to where you'll slide back a little bit, but less the next time. And I think that, yeah, it just makes me think of people who, especially who have lost a lot of weight. It's unrealistic to think that you're just going to stay one weight forever. So just think about those fluctuations getting smaller and smaller and smaller over the years.
Yeah, I love that. And because it's like, it's not like you just hit this goal weight and then that's it forever and you've reached it. Like there's still going to be things that you need to do. And there are going to be some fluctuations, not that you just maintain this all the time. You look the same all the time. There are going to be seasons, and that's okay. So hopefully, guys, that you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christy Lynn Fit, and Marissa's at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and hope to see you back next week.